I am joined by Therese Assouad, who is the lead member for climate emergency at the Barrow Borough Council. There was something else that I found about you as well. You are on the Wildlife and Heritage Advisory Group as well. So you kind of have a good perspective of what we're looking at for our area.
Yes.
So what is that role as lead member for climate emergency?
I guess I see it as being a role that involves trying to keep abreast at a certain level with all the projects and developments and ideas that are going around in our town, in our local area, to listen to what people have to say as well and to try and answer their questions about what the council's doing, to look and be aware of wider issues. So to try and keep abreast of what's going on nationally and internationally, really, as much as one can. I suppose I'm very aware that it is a big role compared to some of the others because it covers like so many different areas. And there are some things, well, a lot of the things that are dependent upon other groups, other organisations and bodies, being aware and making changes, not just the council thing, but the council is not the be all and end all of it all. And I suppose also I would really reiterate which things that I've heard recently on all the climate change programmes and listening to David Attenborough as well, that perhaps first and foremost, it would be a good idea if most of us as individuals took on our own responsibility for making a difference seriously and start with little changes which then have a ripple effect outwards.
I know that you have actually, I've had a look, and for anybody listening, you can find out a lot of the information about what the council is doing and the sort of reports that have gone into this if they go to the Barrow Borough Council website and barrowbc.gov.uk and you type in climate emergency and loads of things come up. I guess one of the questions is I think a lot of people don't really understand what the council actually does, the Barrow Borough Council, and sort of how those sort of choices, those goals affect those services. Because we know that the council is sort of responsible for things like refuge and recycling, things like planning permission. Also, I think building control as well may come under the council.
To some extent. So we're responsible, as you quite rightly say, for refuge collecting, recycling and all of those issues, which are always a bit contentious and there are always quite a few problems going on with them. And I guess I can say on that one, when people actually say, what are we doing about recycling, and recycling bins are causing issues, that the street care team are really looking into trying to resolve those issues to some extent and are sending out letters to households who perhaps found their bins have been regularly not emptied because they've been contaminated. Mm-hmm. So letters about that and giving people ways of finding out in more detail exactly what can and can't go into the red bins. And I think also there's plans, if people continue not to follow the rules as they should be, to start issuing more fines, or people will be prosecuted. So it's like we're definitely trying to make a big difference on this within limited means. So that's what I can say.
Well, speaking of recycling, this is something that, we do. There's some places where you go, some cities where, just the bins around the town or in the villages, they have a recycling option and the general waste option, which we don't have. But also, like my red bin, it's huge, but I can't actually fit all my recycling in there. So there is that sort of reducing thing that I personally need to do. But it does sort of make me wonder, if everybody is doing it to the extent that we want them to, can the services match that? Can they keep up with people actually recycling as much as possible?
Well, I think that's what's currently under discussion, to be honest. So people are, we are aware that more needs to be done, and that also we need to start introducing like recycling of kitchen waste and things like that, which is done in some areas but not in others. And I think if you look across the country, it's so varied in the way different authorities deal with these problems. So I don't know if there's a totally right answer for one particular area, but I know that the street care, I know that we are currently in discussions with the refuse collectors about how to do things more efficiently. So I guess, we are looking at it. That's all I can say. And it's an ongoing thing that I can't really give you any dates or times or when this will be resolved, apart from I know that the red bin, the issues with bins not being emptied because they're contaminated, which is quite a, to be honest, is being looked at in more detail as from next week.
Okay. Well, the climate change jury that was recently local households, 4,000 households were sent letters to invite them to apply to be on this jury. And that is closed now. And I know that in the next couple of weeks, they'll actually start meeting and start talking to sort of experts, leaders in fields about what could change, what the council could do. But the thing that I was really sort of interested in is that they were looking for a cross section of opinions, particularly by skeptics. You've got people who are really invested in climate change and people who are part of things like Extinction Rebellion who are going to be like, yes, I want to have my say. But what about the skeptics? And do you think that those people who maybe, you've got two sides, you've got the people who say, well, it's too late now, why do anything? And then the people who say, well, no, this is just scaremongering. So where do you think those people sort of fit in with this vision that you have for what the council is going to provide?
Well, I guess it's because everybody is entitled to an opinion and to have their voice heard. So they definitely, and obviously that comes under things like equality and diversity, doesn't it? So everyone's entitled to opinion and to have their voice heard, provided they, follow whatever are the kind of the group procedures for having people's voice heard. So, obviously certain ways of behaving would be expected. So anyone's entitled to express a view, but it's the manner in which it's expressed will be the thing that will be key, I think, to things working properly. I'm just thinking of another group which kind of links into this a little bit, which was also called the New Constellations. I don't know if you've heard of that one. Yeah, but they were recruited again in a similar kind of way, a cross-section of the community, not just usual kind of people like sitting on committees or being in groups and trying forge change. And I know personally a few people who did join up to that, who were very sceptic at the beginning, thinking it was far too arty-farty and it wouldn't make any difference and all that kind of thing. And now they are quite agreeably surprised to see the difference that it has made and their voice has been listened to. So I'm only hoping that the citizens' joy will function in a similar way, that people who are perhaps a bit sceptical, if they go there, they need to go there too with an open mind. I think it's like we all do. I think going into these discussions, there's so many different angles, aren't there, and facets of the problem, that you can't say it's just one thing is right and one thing isn't. I mean, there's some scientific facts that obviously we all have to believe in and accept as being relevant, but some other opinions, perhaps, it's debatable, or you can't really say definitely one thing is better than another always. So, like things like, I mean, it's something that I also bring up now, is like we're all talking about going to electric cars, for example, with batteries that we charge and so on. But when I start thinking ahead as to what's going to happen to the batteries, then they all become defunct. But because that's not going to happen for probably another 10 or 15 years on the whole, nobody's given me an answer to that.
So, I love that you brought that up. A little bit later, I do want to talk about some of those ideas that have been floated forward to help things like Barrow Borough Council meet their targets. We're going to come back in a little bit and talk about some of the reports that's come out. Thank you, Terry. We're going to listen to some music and we'll be right back. I'm joined by Therese Assouad, and she is the lead member for Climate Emergency with the Barrow Borough Council. And Terry, I was so excited to create this show, this environment show, because I honestly don't actually know a lot, and I'm looking forward to learning more about it, and also sort of to sort of understand a bit more the sort of nuances and the different sort of ways that companies and businesses and governments can sort of think about and make targets. And I think you had sort of a similar experience. This is very much a learning opportunity for you as well.
Yes, it is indeed. I mean, I've only been on the council 2 years, and as we know, quite a large part of that time has been in lockdown. So, in a way, some learning experiences have been greatly curtailed. We haven't met very much. A lot of meetings and trainings and things that normally would have happened, and going about in the community and visiting places, all of that was put on hold. So really, this is that. And now, not only are we just like getting perhaps back to normal a bit more normalised anyway, but now, as you're aware, we have all this local government reorganisation thrown at us, which is again, to some extent, detracted from what we wanted to focus on. Well, it's not detracting, but it's another thing we have to cope with and come to terms with. And it's not just, it's kind of something there up for discussion. It's got lots of practical issues that we've all got to, those of us who want to be part of the next authority, have to start applying again and be selected and go through all that process, which, as you're probably aware, I know you're aware of, is very time.
I was going to say, it feels like we just did it yesterday, and we may have to do it all over again in May. How exciting.
There's so many things coming at us from all angles. It's really quite hard. So all I suppose I feel I can do is try and keep abreast as much as I can. And I rely really very much on our hard-working officers at the Town Hall. And I think if ever I was in doubt as to what officers in the Town Hall actually do, well, I'm not anymore. I mean, they are so hardworking and so dedicated and fair and treat everybody with respect, and, are just very supportive people. So I think without them being there, we would achieve very little, really.
Well, they again, on the Barrow Borough Council website, barrowbc.gov.uk, you can see all the sort of council reports regarding things like, and I love it because it's such a wide variety, as you say, many facets. So it includes a couple of reports on Cumbria wind energy, safeguarding our soils, a biodiversity action plan. But the thing that sort of stuck out when I was looking at some of these is that when we're talking about climate change and what the council's looking at, we've got, so if we're thinking about, well, how is it going to affect our community? I think many of us have gone to see, okay, well, if the seas rise in the next few years, what is our sort of coastline going to look like? And it's like, where's my house on that? So we have those sorts of things going on of, okay, what's going to happen to the biodiversity? What's going to happen to our landscape with climate change and things like extreme weather, which we can get here. But also it goes on to sort of other sort of global effects and things that we can do locally, but also sort of nationally and globally as well. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts about what could be changing for us in the next 5, 10, 50 years if we're looking at things going the way they are now, and particularly because your experiences on wildlife and heritage. What do you think could be some effects that we'll all recognize just here in the Furness area?
Well, I mean, one that we definitely recognise, and if people want to be astute and start observing it, would be the erosion of part of the coastline. I mean, if you go down to South Warney Nature Reserve, when there's a high tide and a very high tide and a storm, that area, that south end area there, is virtually cut off. So in a few years, it will be. And there's nothing that anyone will do to stop it. That natural England will just leave that kind of thing to happen. There are some things that will happen around the Ernsey Bay area where the defences in the end won't be adequate, and a certain amount of natural erosion will happen there. I know in the summer I went on a guided walk through North Warney Nature Reserve, and it was explained to us there how the sea was gradually encroaching over the sand dunes there, and so things would change there. But the warden who was giving the talk wasn't saying, "Oh, this is terrible," and he did explain that some people think, well, we should be building up defences there to stop the sand dunes being broken down or eroded. But he said, well, no, because it's part of nature. So what we'll lose, we'll gain in another way, because we have like a seawater lagoon there, which we didn't have before. So it's kind of looking at what will happen, and the money to stop it is just not there, and it probably wouldn't even be sufficient without it. I mean, I watched some of the programs last night, well, Panorama, looking at the erosion and terrible things that happen somewhere. And some examples around Barrow would be the same. Not probably so catastrophic immediately, but a gradual, gentle kind of things will start to change around the coastline. And we have to kind of accept that, and that's part of the way things are going to happen everywhere in the world. We will lose some part of the coastline around there.
Well, looking at things, for example, if anyone wants to learn more about that, there's a Northwest Shoreline Management Plan, and that's, to be honest, 11 years old, but...
And there's coastal working groups as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, some things, it's kind of looking at what is manageable and what actually probably isn't, and then kind of looking at like why we can plant more trees. So there's like plans to plant more trees and having like a more forested area going along the coast, which will also help. And various other strategies like that I was at a meeting last week with United Utilities when they came. Actually, that was to the overview and scrutiny meeting to talk about the work they'd be doing to try and help with the flooding that occurs along the promenade, Walney, and those areas. And that there is work they can do. They've actually put in for permissions to start the process so that this work can be carried out. So that would then alleviate, hopefully, for the time being at least, that area getting flooded. So there's things that can be done, and there's other things we have to just let nature take its course, really.
Well, that's something that I'd like to talk about sort of a little bit later, but that idea of, what the council can be doing, what the businesses can be doing, and what individuals can be doing as well. We're going to take a little break. We'll be back, and I've got this list of targets for 2037. So we'll have a look at that and see what's being put in place for those things. Therese Assouad is lead member for Climate Emergency. We've been talking about Barrow Council's sort of plans and the work that they're doing to sort of address these concerns about climate change. And I'm looking specifically at the targets. Anybody, if they want to, can go to the Barrow Borough Council website. You can find all this information there. I actually love that if you look it up online, it's actually under Public Protection Services. I think that's quite interesting, talking about that, protecting the public and doing it in the interests of our local community. So, Terry, can you tell me a little bit about the targets? There's 6 targets here. And some of it is things that the council can do, and some of it is things that you can encourage. So specifically, one of the questions, we know that the Barrow Borough Council manages some council properties. So when you say reduce emissions, how do you do that?
From the properties?
Mm-hmm.
Well, in public housing, they're having 90, I think it's 90 properties. That's the properties that the Borough Council own, council properties, are having solar energy panels fitted, for example. Public buildings, they are having LED lighting fitted and solar panels installed. At the Dot Museum is one place, for example. I know at the Forum they have already, I think the target date for that is 2021.
This year.
Yeah. So they have quite a few energy performance plans for the Dot Museum and the Forum, which are buildings that they own, to reduce the carbon footprint by having solar panels and LED lighting to reduce CO2 emissions. They're also using putting up, I don't know if this comes quite into it, electric vehicle charge points.
Oh, that's really important, I know, to people who are lucky enough to have an electric car.
And then as a council, they will be using and seeking to use more electric vehicles themselves. They're also actively encouraging workers to cycle or walk to work. And you probably will have heard that there are new cycle routes, hopefully, coming into Barrow, which will encourage everybody to use more friendly ways of getting to work.
I don't know. Cyclists on the A590 are incredibly brave and really, really fit. I'm not sure if I could quite manage that.
That's been the older generation thing. This might be all right for, as you say, fit young people. I can't see a lot of middle age and older people taking to the roads on their bicycles in the winter months in Barrow. Realistically, I can't see that. However, I do know that we're looking to get, I don't know the data, but electric buses and things like that. So I know that is in process. So once we have those, that would be better. And perhaps improving bus routes so that people stop taking their cars out and about quite so much as they do. So I think those kind of things, and this perhaps bit comes down to then things like it's a bit of our own personal responsibility to try and make changes to work out. I think a friend of mine actually, what really surprised me yesterday, he told me how much it cost him, he reckoned, to drive his car from near where we live, which is Ainsley Street area, down to Tesco's and that. No, it's expensive. Mm-hmm. It's emitting carbon. It's why do it when we've got two co-ops within walking distance? So it's all kind of weighing up things that you can perhaps make a difference, or that we go back to. Well, I remember when I was a young woman, because it was in time of other kinds of crises going on in our country to do with heating and so on, and fossil fuels being available then to use, that we did start sharing this and planning shopping trips together and doing monthly shops, whereas as now people seem to go to the shops virtually every day. Some people do. So it's like,
Oh, no, I never do that.
No, but I mean, I can remember, it's really funny that as a neighbour, we used to sit and plan, like a trip to the supermarket to do, several weeks shopping for the basic things anyway. And that would, I don't know why people can't start being a bit more thinking along those lines. How can we, save our planet by making little differences ourselves? Rethinking the way we live our lives and being more community-minded.
Well, there is something, though, and one of the sort of goals to be net zero, carbon zero by 2037 is things like, increasing public awareness. We know that a few weeks ago, the Prime Minister came on and said, we want every home to have a heat pump, which could run up to £12,000. But there was a government initiative. There was an opportunity for a grant. Now, I live in a big, very drafty terraced house and it is quite expensive for me to get this house to an EPC, the energy standard that we have, like for a lot of rental properties have to have a certain level of energy efficiency. It would be very expensive for me to try to do that on my home. So there are going to be people who say, oh, it's too expensive for me to get an electric vehicle. It's too expensive for me to get my house more heat efficient. So how do you think that the council may be able to help to meet this goal for 2037?
Well, I can only say this without speaking off the top of my head a bit. One, I guess, would be public education. Perhaps there are things we can do that don't necessarily cost as much as having electric heaters in our homes. If in big houses, where it would be very expensive, because I live in a similar one to yourself, I think. So, but there are smaller changes we can make. That having draft excluders and insulating things now, there are grants, or there have been in the past, for insulation, definitely. Maybe these kind of things the council could look at, where we could, and I think they are looking at where some grants could be made available to people to help do some of these things. I can't say that they could probably give new boilers to everybody in the borough. That would be kind of ridiculous aim. But I think there are little things that we can still do, perhaps, to make some changes. and be a little bit more savvy about how we use the rooms in our houses even. If we do want the luxury of having our big sprawling house as well, we have to accept it's going to possibly cost us more to run them in the future. So how do we manage to overcome that? Either we change where we live, or we look at how we can insulate it better, and keep out some of the drafts and the coldness, and maybe not have the heating on quite so much, and go back to like when I grew up. It sounds like I'm somebody out come to life out of a history book. We didn't have central heating, and we just put on another layer of clothes in the winter. Now, I know from younger people whose homes I visit, they expect to live in houses that are heated to a degree, whereas they can walk around just as you would in summer all year round. And I think maybe we have to think a bit differently along some of those lines.
Well, I love that you said that. We're going to come back in a few minutes and talk about that sort of balance between sort of council and business and individual choices and changes. So please stay tuned. We'll be back in a little bit more with Councillor Therese Assouad. So we've been talking about climate change, climate targets, carbon positive, carbon neutral with Therese Assouad, who is the lead member for climate emergency with the Barrow Borough Council. She's one of the councillors, I believe, for Parkside. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And a little while ago, we touched on a couple of things. One of it is sort of individual opportunities to have a positive impact specifically for the Furness area, but also sort of nationally and globally. But there is that balance between what the council can do and the things that it can sort of put into place. You did mention working with a local business to help alleviate flooding on Walney Prom. And we also talked about the individual. So where do you think that balance is, or how do you think that your role can help bring those different sort of facets together in a positive way?
I suppose I would see my role, or the role of probably any councillor, to be honest, is not to try and do the things yourself, because you can't, but to facilitate other people to get together and to discuss and find solutions to problems. So I guess it would be in communication, keeping people in touch with what is going on, signposting them to places where they could get grants for different things that might help them in regards to helping their home give off less carbon, and insulate it better, that kind of thing. So I would see it perhaps as a important role as a kind of educator, facilitator in the matter, as well as perhaps offering some practical help.
Well, and we talked about this also, is that we've been told that the councils are going to change. There's a shakeup in government where instead of being the Barrow Borough Council, they'll be, it's the Barrow and South Lakeland, and is it Westmoreland?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's going to be the sort of structure is going to change. So you've set these targets. There was in 2019, the council declared a climate emergency. You've done all these reports. You've got these targets, and even now you have things in place to sort of help create that plan. But do you think, from your experience and sort of what you've seen going on, will these things that you're doing now as a council, will it be able to continue after when the authority changes? Is it something that you think that can be contributed to something that's a bit wider, that covers East Cumbria?
Well, that's something that's a bit of the melting pot, isn't it? And we're only just being given information as to how things will function. So we obviously, I would say as a councillor here, and the discussions I've had with the other members of the council, in our group meetings and so on, is that those of us who want to try and stand for the new authority do so that we can still try and provide the best local services that we can for Barrow. That we need to have people who are from the area, who know what's going on and have a bit of a grip on development, to be involved in the new authority. so I think it is down to us councillors and members of the community to be involved as much as possible and aware of the changes that are going on and how they can be part of them, rather than just saying, I don't like this, we didn't vote for this one, we wanted something different. Because if we don't take an active part and aren't, vociferous in the way we discuss things, we don't know what will be. We can't really predict at all what will happen to our communities with any degree of certainty. I mean, I know there are plans possibly that we will have parishes and town councils in Barrow as well. A town council rather, not several. But those are still in discussion stages.
Yeah, that's going to have a big effect on things like, for example, Askham and Ireland Parish Council, Dalton Town Council.
Well, so I think, there are a lot of things that are happening, but haven't happened yet. And we're not, as I said to you at the beginning, we are not completely sure of exactly how things are going to unfold. Probably the government isn't either. So many different, I was just thinking today, I just hope we don't end up in another lockdown situation around Christmas time, because that's going to really scupper so many plans. But there we are. So I think it's like, again, I do say it's a bit like everybody needs to have a degree of responsibility. So when they're given the opportunity to go along to things to look at and to discuss and ask about the council's plans, and I really, would urge them to do so, and then they can get their voice heard a bit. If only get half a dozen people turning up to these things, really that is not representative of the town at all. But then the town will say, but no one asked us, so why are these things happening? So I think it's like a responsibility we have to take a bit more seriously, perhaps.
Thank you so much for being on the show. You've given us lots of information and things to think about. I've been speaking with Therese Assouad, and I'm looking forward to seeing sort of the next stages, particularly as the council changes. So thank you again for being on the show.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.